Hello there, readers. So today's close reading article is called Why Travel Sucks, but Why We Need It More Than Ever. And so I think just by looking at the title that this is probably going to be a persuasive text. So I'm going to add an annotation in there just so that I know right off the bat it's probably going to be persuasive. I'm going to see some author's bias in here, the author's opinion about travel. So apparently, according to this author, travel is tough or difficult, but it's something that we need. And I suppose as I read, I'll find out why we need travel more than ever. So let's take a look. Leaving home isn't easy, but it is our best chance to make the world a more understanding place. Okay, so there we go. Gives me some insight into why maybe travel is important. So I'm going to add an annotation in here just by going to insert, clicking on comment. So leaving home or traveling makes the world a more understanding place. And so I'm going to read on and find out how exactly travel makes the world more understanding. The secret of happiness is to see all the marvels of the world and never to forget the drops of oil on the spoon. Now I recognize this quote. This is from The Alchemist. Here, marvels of the world. So this is a word that I want to check out. Maybe I'm not really sure. The secret of happiness is to see all the marvels of the world and never forget the drops of oil on the spoon. So a quote here that contains a lot of literary devices, or at least maybe some symbolism, perhaps an analogy here or a metaphor, that reading the novel, definitely as we've been doing that and thinking about this quote in terms of our discussions as a class, can help me better understand what this quote means in the context of our story. But I'm just going to go ahead and highlight that word marvels and see, using my word skills here, the secret of happiness is to see all the marvels of the world. So I'm thinking this is probably a positive word because it's associated with happiness. So maybe to see all of the wonderful things or all of the great things. I think this word is definitely positive, associated with happiness, or the key to happiness anyway. So maybe it's wonderful stuff or great things. So to travel is going to show us all kinds of awesome things, and so that's probably a good idea. Let's see what the author has to say, why this quote might be here. In all of my life, I have never found a quote or passage so relatable. So the author can relate to that quote from the story. I first discovered these words while reading The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho on a crowded bus to Ecuador, trying to block out the extremely loud sound of the Spanish dubbed Tom Cruise movie blaring from the television at the front. I read the line again and again, trying to soak up its meaning. So he took some time here as a reader to really reflect on that quote. So as readers, we sometimes are able to connect with something that we're reading. So it's really important, and I can see that he used a rereading strategy to really understand the message that was being delivered in the novel. So it seems interesting to hear that from the author use some of the strategies that we've talked about. To me, those drops of oil represent people. Okay, so we're getting a little bit of the interpretation here, and I have learned the hard way that it's extremely difficult to balance seeing all of the marvels of the world, traveling, if you will, while still taking attentive care of the relationships you have elsewhere on the planet. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight this because as I'm reading, the title said that travel is difficult, but that it's essential. And he's starting out here talking about this quote that he read in a story and just kind of capturing my attention and starting to tell me his opinion. And by the time I get down to roughly the third or fourth paragraph here, I'm starting to see how he's reflecting on this quote and making meaning of it. And he's talking about how it's difficult when we travel to leave the people that we care about, that kind of when we go places, when we travel, when we leave home, we are making some sacrifices. You know, we're putting some strain on a relationship, but he's going to go on and tell us about why that's something that we should be doing and how that makes the world a more understanding place. He says that after all, you cannot enjoy being fully present while on the road if you're constantly glued to your phone. But on the other hand, you won't have much of a coming home party if you forget about everyone while you're away either. So there's a sense here that he's talking about when we travel, we have to find a balance between what we're doing in the moment and where we are coming from, or basically striking a balance between staying in touch with the people that we've left behind, but also enjoying where it is that we're going and our journey. So that's an interesting idea there that would definitely make traveling difficult to try to strike a balance. And so what I would do as I'm reading through the first time, and if you look back at the directions, I'm going to go through, and really the annotations I think are one of the most important parts of a close reading, because you're trying the first time that you read something to really make sure that you understand what the text is saying. And the annotations are a way for you to kind of reflect on some of the ideas that are presented. And in a text like this that's persuasive, where I'm getting a lot of bias and opinion, you know, do I agree with everything that he's saying? Do I understand the point that the author is trying to make? And I can kind of evaluate whether the argument is effective in terms of my understanding and my beliefs as well. And I would also go through and highlight information that I think is important. So maybe something that I don't necessarily need to paraphrase or restate. Maybe it's a straightforward comment, like the interpretation of a quote, for example, in this paragraph here, where I just want to highlight that because I know that's something that I think might be something that I want to return to. It might help me understand the main idea or the author's point. And then, of course, if there are any words that I don't know, I definitely want to make sure that I am completely understanding what I'm reading. So I'll highlight those words. I'll use my word skills and see if I can understand what they mean. And here in this particular word, I didn't use any, affixes to try to figure out how they change a root word or anything like that. What I did was I went back and I looked at the context of the sentence, and I saw that he was talking about the secret of happiness, and so that told me that this is definitely a positive word. So what maybe could this word mean in terms of the relationship it has with the other words in the sentence? So I'm able to do that through the first reading, and just shows me that I understand what I'm reading and that I can start to question and think about what it is that I'm reading as I go through. Now in the second read, what I want to do is go through and start to pick out important details in the text. And so what your teacher has done for you then is actually included questions like you might ask yourself as you're reading. So I talked about how the text was persuasive, and I said, okay, I know I'm going to try to be convinced to do something or to believe something. I know that I'm going to get bias and opinion. So I'm already on the lookout for that and trying to determine if this is something that I agree with or not. And it's a question that I asked throughout my first reading, and you see it pop up here again in the second reading. Okay, so if I didn't pick up on the persuasive techniques used in the beginning, or if I didn't pick up on something that maybe was intended to grab the reader's attention, through the second read, I have the opportunity to really be able to reflect on that important point. So what persuasive techniques is the author using to grab the reader's attention? And you want to look, of course, at attention grabbers and hooks. We have a powerful quote, which is definitely a persuasive technique. Sometimes authors will ask rhetorical questions, or they'll use an amazing statistic or a quote that really has a lot of impact, and they'll use these kind of persuasive techniques to grab your attention, keep you reading, and maybe even try to create some kind of appeal to you emotionally or logically, or even appealing to your ethics in some way. So you want to think about the persuasive techniques so that you're kind of on the lookout for how you're going to try to be convinced to do something or to believe something, so that you don't fall it into any kind of propaganda technique or anything like that. And of course, the questions continue. How does the author interpret the symbolism of the quote from the novel? And the great thing about a lot of these questions is throughout my reading, because I took the time in that close reading, in my first reading, to really think about what it was I was reading, I've already got the answer to this. I already highlighted that part of the text. I've already made an annotation about it. And so the second reading actually will go a lot quicker because a lot of these questions have already come out as I was reading. And if they didn't, then it's an opportunity for me to dig in and maybe see something that I missed the first time. So there are several different questions in here. Some of them ask about maybe words that we couldn't figure out maybe through the first reading, and maybe a better understanding of the text as we read again really helps us to figure out what an unknown word means. It gives us an opportunity to look again at some of the literary devices or figurative language that are used and analyze those in terms of meaning. And then finally, the last thing to do on this particular close read is to look at the final prompt, where I really get a chance to reflect or evaluate and synthesize the information. So here the prompt says, Mark Twain wrote, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. Discuss whether the author of the article, Travel Sucks, would agree or disagree with this quote. Use examples from the text to support your answer." So here we have an opportunity to make a text connection to something else, and also think about it in terms of how it might be relevant to our lives as we're thinking about these ideas. So this Mark Twain quote, this specific one we've talked about in class, we talked about it at the beginning of the unit. So you know that if you aren't really sure what this quote means, that's the first thing you need to unpack. What is it that the quote is actually saying? What is it that Mark Twain believes? What is the message that's being delivered? And then going back and looking at the first and second readings that we had done of this particular article, would this author agree or disagree with the quote based on what it is that he's trying to persuade us to do or to believe? And then we have an opportunity here to look at both ideas and compare and contrast them in a way as we make the connection between what the authors are saying and really start to evaluate and reflect on our reading and whether or not these ideas make sense to us. So that is how you would approach this particular close reading. You, of course, have a rubric here. It's very important to always make sure you understand how you're going to be graded. So make sure that you are using specific evidence, that you are showing that you have dug into the text in that first reading. You're highlighting things that seem important. You're taking notes in your annotations. You're making note of unknown words. You're just pulling information out that's really essential. In the second reading, that you're able to fully answer the comprehension questions. It's better if you're answering them in complete sentences, that you're using proper grammar and mechanics, because reading and writing go hand in hand. And so to show that you have the strong skills for being able to write out complete sentences, then that's always great. And I'm not really sure what happened to the bottom of the rubric there, but the prompt, of course, should also, and we've seen this rubric before, so you do have that available to you. But if you have questions, ask your teacher. But the prompt should be fully and completely answered as well. You want to make sure that you're giving your ideas effectively, that you're writing complete sentences, that you are using specific support from the text to support your answer. Because the more proof you have, the more persuasive your response is going to be. As always, if you have any questions, check with your teacher.